The Valley of Two Gardens. In the shadow of twin mountains lay a village where two extraordinary gardens flourished, each tended by souls as different as winter and summer. The first garden belonged to Elders Rosa, a stooped woman whose fingers were permanently stained with earth. Her plot was modest, perhaps 20 paces square, yet every inch bloomed with purpose. Wild herbs spilled over the edges of wooden boxes she'd built from discarded fence posts. Tomato vines climbed ladders fashioned from fallen branches. She coaxed flowers from poor soil using only compost from her kitchen scraps and wisdom passed down through generations. Rosa lived in a small cottage with a leaky roof that she patched each spring with whatever materials she could find. The few coins she received each month could barely cover bread and beans, yet she never seemed to want for anything. Each morning at dawn, you'd find her in the garden, humming as she pulled weeds. Evenings, she'd sit on her porch, tea in hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The second garden sprawled across the mountainside, a monument to human ambition. It belonged to Maximus, a merchant whose trade routes spanned 3 kingdoms. His garden employed a dozen workers and featured exotic plants imported from distant lands. Water cascaded through marble channels carved by master craftsmen. Pavilions of rare wood offered shade at every turn. The garden's centerpiece was a towering observatory from which Maximus could survey his domain. Despite its grandeur, Maximus rarely walked in his garden. Messages arrived constantly from traders, suppliers, and nobles. His evenings were consumed with ledgers and correspondence. He owned 3 magnificent homes but slept poorly in all of them, waking often in cold sweats about damaged shipments or rival merchants. The Awakening. One spring morning, a traveling philosopher arrived in the village. He was drawn first to Rosa's garden, where she was transplanting seedlings. Her hands moved with such tenderness that he stood transfixed. "Your garden brings joy to the soul," he told her, his own weathered hands betraying years of searching. Rosa smiled, wiping her hands on her worn apron. "Oh, this old patch? It's nothing special. I just try to work with what I have." "But you seem so content," the philosopher pressed, his voice carrying a wistfulness that surprised them both. "Do you never wish for more?" "More what?" Rosa asked genuinely. "I have my plants, my birds that visit, the changing seasons. In the evenings, I read books from the library. What more could I want?" The philosopher spent the afternoon with Rosa, helping her tend the small plot. As the sun set, she shared simple soup and bread with him. For the first time in years, he felt a familiar peace he'd been seeking on distant roads. The next day, curiosity led him up the mountain to Maximus's estate. The merchant received him in a grand hall lined with tapestries, though his eyes kept darting to unopened letters. "Welcome," boomed Maximus, his voice defiant against the wear in his bones. "You must tour my garden, it's the finest in 3 kingdoms." As they walked the manicured paths, Maximus spoke of the garden's cost, its rarity, its famous visitors. Yet the philosopher noticed the merchant's distraction, how his joy seemed strained. "It's truly impressive," the philosopher said. "You must find great peace here." Maximus laughed bitterly. "Peace? I barely have time to breathe. These gardens require constant management. And then there are my other estates, and my ships at sea." "But surely this brings happiness?" the philosopher asked, his own doubts about his years of wandering stirring. "I work every waking moment to maintain what I have and acquire more." Maximus paused beside a fountain. "I sleep with one ear open, listening for threats." The lesson unfolds. That evening, the philosopher pondered the stark contrast. Rosa had almost nothing, yet lacked for nothing. Maximus had everything yet was never satisfied. His own endless journeying suddenly seemed as hollow as Maximus's accumulation. Over the following days, he learned their stories. Rosa had once been a cook in a great house. When the family fell on hard times, they released their servants. At 70, she found herself with nowhere to go and only a few silver coins. Rather than despair, she'd settled on this neglected patch of land and gradually transformed it. "I discovered something wonderful," she told the philosopher one evening as the evening breeze stirred gently through her flowers. "When you have little, but want even less, you're truly rich. Every bloom is a miracle. Every tomato, a feast." The philosopher also learned that Maximus hadn't always been consumed by acquisition. In his youth, he'd been content as a humble trader with a single cart. But success bred ambition, and ambition bred anxiety. I remember when a new donkey for my cart seemed like the greatest luxury, Maximus confided during a rare quiet moment. Now I own fleets, yet sleep worse than when I had nothing. The merchant's revelation. One night, a fire broke out in the village. Rosa's cottage caught flame first. Maximus, despite their different stations, felt compelled to help. He found Rosa outside, calmly directing neighbors as they formed bucket brigades. "Your home," he exclaimed. "Your garden." Rosa smiled sadly but remained serene. Things can be rebuilt. Life goes on. Maximus expected to find her devastated the next morning, but she was already clearing the charred plot, neighbors helping without being asked. Someone had donated lumber, another brought seeds, yet another offered a place to stay. Watching this, something shifted in Maximus. He saw how Rosa's contentment had created genuine relationships while his wealth had bred isolation. The philosopher, observing the two of them, felt his own understanding deepen. The transformation. Inspired, Maximus began visiting his garden, actually walking its paths instead of merely overseeing them. One day, he arrived at Rosa's rebuilding plot with an offer. "Let me fund your new garden. I can hire the best builders." Rosa shook her head gently. "Your kindness touches my heart, but I must decline. My joy comes not from having the finest things, but from creating beauty with my own hands." Maximus felt revelation dawn. The limitation is part of the joy. "Perhaps," Rosa smiled. "When you must be creative with little, every success feels miraculous." The great decision. That night, Maximus sat in his observatory, brooding. A messenger arrived with news of a lost ship, cargo worth a fortune destroyed in a storm. Years ago, this would have sent him into rage. Tonight, he simply nodded. Looking down at his grand garden, then across to where Rosa planted by lamplight, he made a decision that would shock his world. He began giving away his wealth. Not all, he wasn't foolish, but enough to live simply. He sold estates, released servants with generous severances, contracted his trade. His former peers called him mad, but Maximus had discovered something priceless: freedom to choose how to spend his days. Years later. 5 years passed. The philosopher returned to find Rosa's garden rebuilt and flourishing, neighboring another modest plot where Maximus worked beside her. Both showed their years, but their faces glowed. "I kept enough to live comfortably," Maximus explained, hands dirty from planting. "But comfortable meant much less than I thought. Now I sleep through the night." "And you regret nothing?" the philosopher asked, his own weariness from years of searching evident. Maximus looked at Rosa, who was teaching village children to transplant seedlings. "I only regret waiting so long." Rosa overheard and added with a gentle laugh, "The hardest shackles to break are often those we forge ourselves." The eternal truth. As the sun set behind the Twin Mountains, the philosopher felt his own transformation complete. He'd sought wisdom on 100 roads, but found it here in 2 small gardens. Here were souls who discovered that freedom comes not from having everything you want, but from wanting what you have. Their gardens flourished not because they were grandest, but because they were tended with hands that knew their true worth. The philosopher decided to stay, to tend his own small plot between theirs. He'd spent years crossing bridges, only to learn that home might be found in the simplest soil. And in the valley of 2 gardens, now 3, there bloomed the rarest flower of all, the quiet joy of enough.